My husband texted me at 5:42 on a Friday afternoon. "Get home when you can. Everyone's here, I've got big news." 20 minutes later, he placed a DNA report beside the strawberry cheesecake I had picked up for him and told me the 13-month-old girl in my arms was not his daughter. Before I tell you what happened after that, you need to understand something about me. My name is Rachel Bennett. I was 43 years old then, and I worked in logistics for the Kentucky National Guard out of an administrative office near Frankfurt. My days were built around schedules, inventory, transportation requests, equipment records, contingency plans, and making sure small mistakes did not become expensive problems. People who work around soldiers learn quickly that surprises are rarely welcome. Neither are vague answers. I liked knowing what was coming next. That Friday, for maybe 20 minutes, I let myself believe the surprise waiting at home might actually be a good one. My husband, Mark, had been interviewing for a senior operations position at the construction company where he had worked for nearly 11 years. He had been restless about it for weeks, checking his email through dinner and taking calls in the garage so our daughter, Lucy, would not wake up. So when he sent that message, I assumed he had gotten the promotion. On the way home, I stopped at a grocery store and bought his favorite dessert, strawberry New York cheesecake with the glossy red topping he always stole with his finger before I could cut the first slice. Lucy was cranky when I lifted her out of her car seat. She had spent the last 10 minutes pulling at the collar of my uniform shirt and kicking one sock halfway off. I remember balancing her against my hip, hooking the cheesecake box under my arm, and thinking, maybe tonight will finally feel normal. Normal had been hard to come by. Lucy had arrived when I was 42, after 4 years of appointments, medications, blood draws, injections, procedures, failed cycles, and waiting rooms that always seemed to smell like antiseptic and stale coffee. There had been months when Mark and I could barely discuss fertility treatment without one of us becoming angry or shutting down. Then Lucy came. For a while, I believed surviving those years had made us stronger. I noticed the cars in our driveway before I noticed anything else. My parents' Buick was parked near the curb. Mark's mother Diane had left her Lexus at an angle near the mailbox, as if she had pulled in too quickly. His brother Colin's pickup was half on the driveway and half on the grass. I actually smiled. I thought Mark had invited everyone over to celebrate. Maybe dinner. Maybe champagne. Maybe one of those ridiculous family announcements where everyone already knew before I did. I carried Lucy up the front steps and pushed open the door with my elbow. The smile disappeared before I made it 3 feet inside. The house was too quiet. No television. No music. Nobody talking over anybody else. Diane loved noisy gatherings. She normally turned the television on even when no one was watching it because she said silence made a house feel empty. That night, the screen was black. My mother, Carol, sat on the sofa with her purse still in her lap. My father, Thomas, was beside her. Neither of them stood when I came in. Colin leaned against the wall near the dining room with both arms folded. And Mark was sitting at the far end of the coffee table. There was a manila folder directly in front of him. It was lined up perfectly with the edge of the table. Too perfectly. Like he had moved it around several times until it looked right. No one reached for Lucy. No one took the cheesecake from me. I looked around the room. What happened? Mark gestured toward the empty chair across from him. Rachel, sit down, we need to talk without anybody losing control. I stayed standing. About what? He reached toward a tissue box beside him and pushed it a few inches toward my chair. That detail stayed with me longer than almost anything else. The tissues. He had them ready before I even knew why I was supposed to cry. Please, he said, just sit. I lowered Lucy onto my lap and sat across from him. Then Mark slid the folder toward me. Inside was a DNA report. His name appeared near the top. Lucy's information appeared underneath. Near the bottom was the conclusion. Mark Bennett was excluded as the biological father. I read it twice. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny. My mind simply had nowhere sensible to put what I was seeing. You're serious? Mark leaned back. I wish I wasn't. I looked at him. then at the report, then back at him. We spent 4 years in fertility clinics together. His jaw tightened. That doesn't change the result. You were in those rooms with me. I remember. You signed the consent forms. I know what I signed. You watched me give myself injections. Rachel. You stood beside me during transfers. You know exactly how Lucy was conceived. He tapped the report with one finger. I also know what this says. Diane spoke from the sofa. Mark has already spent enough time paying for a child that apparently belongs to somebody else. I turned toward her so quickly Lucy startled in my arms. What did you just say? My mother finally spoke. Rachel, if there is something we need to know, this is probably the time to say it. I stared at her. For one strange second, I felt 17 again, standing in my parents' kitchen while my mother waited for me to admit I had lied about staying late at school. Except I was 43. I had a career. A mortgage-free inherited home. A toddler. A 15-year marriage. And my own mother was looking at me as though someone had emptied my pockets and found evidence of another life. There is nothing to confess. My father said nothing. I turned to him. Dad? He looked at the carpet. That hurt more than Diane's accusation. More than Mark's expression. More than the paper in my hands. Dad, look at me. He finally raised his eyes. Are you actually waiting for me to prove I didn't betray my husband? His mouth opened, but he didn't answer. Something inside me shifted right then. This was no longer a frightened husband confronting his wife over a test result. There was too much preparation. Too much structure. Too many people already assembled. Mark opened a second folder. Inside was a separation agreement. He explained that he had already spoken with someone about handling things privately. If I cooperated, he said, there would be no reason to drag the family through a public dispute. There was a statement saying I had voluntarily left the marital residence. Another section authorized the house to be placed on the market during the separation. There were provisions involving debts, accounts, and division of proceeds. Mark placed a pen beside the paperwork. If we sign this now, we can keep the whole thing from becoming ugly. I read the paragraph about the house again. Then I looked up. The house belonged to my grandmother. He nodded. I know. She left it to me. We both lived here. It is titled only in my name. That can be sorted out later. No, it can't. Diane stood. You're focusing on property after what you've done to my son? I closed the folder. I haven't done anything to your son. Mark exhaled sharply. Rachel, stop making this harder. I'm not signing. His face changed. Just slightly. But I saw it. The calm expression slipped for less than a second. Diane pointed toward the foyer. Then maybe you should take the baby and leave before this turns into something none of us wants. I stood slowly. Lucy had started fussing. I was still holding the cheesecake box in my other hand. Then, at 6:31 p.m., the front door opened. Henry Whitaker walked into my living room carrying an old brown leather portfolio. Henry was 71, soft-spoken, silver-haired, and probably the least dramatic person I had ever met. He had handled my grandmother's estate. Before that, he had prepared her will. He had known her for nearly 30 years. And 3 weeks earlier, I had scheduled a meeting with him for that exact Friday evening. Mark knew Henry by sight, but he did not know why he was there. That became important. Henry stopped just inside the room. His eyes moved from Mark to Diane, then to my parents, then to the separation papers, and finally to the DNA report beside the untouched cheesecake. Rachel, he said, I may have arrived at an inconvenient moment. I almost laughed again. You could say that. Mark stood. Actually, Mr. Whitaker, your timing might be useful. Rachel and I are separating. Henry looked at me. I shook my head once. I haven't agreed to anything. Henry set his portfolio down. In that case, I think we should be careful with terminology. Mark pushed the DNA report toward him. This explains the situation. Henry did not immediately pick it up. Instead, he leaned closer and read the first page where it lay. Then he asked Mark a question. Who collected your sample? Mark frowned. I did. And the child's? I did that too. Henry looked at him. At home? Yes. What identification procedure did the laboratory require? Mark hesitated. It was a private test. Did anyone from the laboratory witness collection? No. Was there chain of custody documentation? I don't know what you mean. Henry nodded. That answers the question. Mark became irritated. It's DNA. The result is right there. Henry finally lifted the report. Which laboratory issued this? Mark pointed to the name printed near the top. Henry read it. Do you have an original report? That is the report. I mean an original transmitted directly by the laboratory. Email portal, certified result, account access, anything of that sort. Mark's expression tightened. It came with the kit. And who swabbed Lucy? I already said I did. She is 13 months old. So I am trying to establish whether anyone other than you can verify what was collected. From whom it was collected. And how it reached the laboratory. Diane interrupted. Are you saying the test is wrong? Henry looked at her. I'm saying I would not dismantle a marriage, force a mother from her home, or transfer property because of a document nobody in this room has verified. Then he turned to me. Do not sign anything tonight. Mark laughed without humor. Of course you'd say that. You're her family attorney. I am her grandmother's former estate attorney. Henry looked around the room. And this house remains titled solely to Rachel unless something has changed that I have not been told about. Marriage gives me rights here, Mark said. Marriage gives you certain rights. It does not allow you to order the titled owner from her property or sell it by yourself. For the first time since I walked through the door, Mark looked uncertain. I could have stayed. Henry made that clear. But Lucy had begun crying against my shoulder, and I suddenly could not stand the idea of putting her to sleep upstairs while everyone downstairs argued about whether she belonged to her own father. I packed a diaper bag. 2 outfits. Her medicine. Her stuffed rabbit. My work laptop. My identification badge. A phone charger. I left the cheesecake untouched on the coffee table. It sat beside Mark's folder like some strange artifact from the evening I thought I was coming home to celebrate his promotion. As I headed toward the door, Mark said, walking out right now is going to look pretty bad. I turned around. I'm not walking out because you told me to. He said nothing. I'm leaving because Lucy should not spend tonight in a room full of adults discussing her like she's evidence. Then I left. I checked into a Fairfield Inn near the interstate. The room smelled faintly of bleach, carpet cleaner, and old coffee. Lucy refused the portable crib. Eventually she fell asleep on my chest while I lay flat on the bed staring at a brownish watermark on the ceiling. For hours, I replayed every fertility appointment. Every injection. Every blood test. Every transfer. Every consent document. Every conversation with a nurse. I searched my memory for some impossible gap where the story Mark was telling could fit. There wasn't one. I knew there wasn't one. But fear is not logical. Fear can make you question things you witnessed with your own eyes. Around midnight, I called my mother. I wanted her to say she was sorry. Instead, Carol said, I'm trying to understand this. There's nothing to understand. Mark showed us a laboratory report. You think I cheated on him? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. She went quiet. Then she said, I want to trust you. But that document looked legitimate. I ended the call before she could hear me crying. By then, something else had begun bothering me. Not the possibility that Mark believed the report. The opposite. I was beginning to suspect he had never believed it. The family gathering. The separation agreement. The house clause. The tissues. Everything had been ready before I arrived. That thought scared me more than the accusation itself. The next morning, I met Henry in the hotel lobby over coffee that tasted burned enough to dissolve a spoon. That was when he reminded me why we had scheduled our Friday meeting in the first place. 3 weeks earlier, I had walked into our home office and caught Mark photographing documents. The deed to my grandmother's house. My retirement statements. Records for Lucy's trust. Old probate papers. He had told me he was updating our insurance information. Maybe that explanation would have worked if it had only been one document. It wasn't. Something about the way he moved when I entered the room bothered me. Too quick. Too casual afterward. I had said nothing. Instead, the following morning, I called Henry. We agreed to check the current title records, confirm there were no liens, secure the original documents somewhere outside the house, and review the trust paperwork. Henry's arrival Friday evening had not been coincidence. He had been coming because I had quietly become suspicious of my husband weeks earlier. We just had not known suspicious of what. Henry called the laboratory listed on the DNA report that morning. For a few minutes, the situation became worse. The laboratory actually existed. I had hoped Mark had used some obviously invented business with a fake website and a mailbox somewhere. He had not. It was a real testing company. But the case number printed on the report did not follow the company's normal numbering system. Customer support could not locate any test connected to Mark's information or Lucis initials. Henry still refused to call the document fabricated. Not until they confirm it in writing, he said. That was Henry. He could make caution sound like a personality disorder. Later, I became grateful for every ounce of it. My father came to the hotel that afternoon. Thomas brought diapers, cereal, fruit, bottled water, and a white envelope filled with cash. I took the groceries. I pushed the envelope back. You might need it. I don't want your money. He stood awkwardly near the small desk. I didn't know what to believe last night. I looked at him. That wasn't the test. What? The test wasn't the part you needed to understand. He frowned. You didn't need to know whether the paper was accurate before deciding not to let your daughter and granddaughter be humiliated in front of a room full of people. His face changed. I continued. You only needed to know me. He looked down. There was no good answer. He left the envelope on the dresser anyway. I mailed it back to him 2 days later. That same afternoon Henry called. The instant I heard his voice, I knew something had changed. The laboratory responded. I sat down on the edge of the hotel bed. And? They did not create the report Mark showed you. I closed my eyes. Henry continued before I could react. There's more. Of course there was. He had checked the county property records. Someone had recently attempted to open a line of credit secured against my house. The application did not succeed. My grandmother had left me the property free and clear, and Mark did not have authority to pledge it without my participation. But the attempt existed, and the supporting information appeared to have come from the exact records I had caught him photographing. That was the moment everything stopped feeling like a marital crisis. It became a financial investigation. Henry recommended a divorce attorney named Claire Monroe. Claire was in her early 50s, spoke in short sentences, and had the remarkable ability to make a conference room feel colder without ever raising her voice. She brought in a forensic accountant named Sonia Alvarez. Sonia was patient, methodical, and terrifying with a spreadsheet. She could look through 70 pages of account activity and spot a suspicious transfer as casually as I might notice the wrong truck number on a shipment manifest. A licensed investigator named Aaron Cole was also retained to verify documents and trace several financial records. I remember staring at Claire's retainer agreement. Several $1,000s just to get started. I had been saving that money for Lucis daycare and emergencies. Now the emergency was my husband. I paid it. I hated paying it. And I knew I could not afford not to. The truth did not arrive in one dramatic discovery. It came slowly. Statement by statement. Account by account. Week after week. Sonia found approximately $245 in liabilities tied to Mark. There were sports betting losses going back more than 2 years. Cash advances on credit cards I did not even know existed. A personal loan. Money borrowed against his truck. Other unsecured debt. Then Sonia found transfers connected to an expense account at Mark's construction company. Some of the transactions did not appear authorized. His employer, we learned, had already started reviewing irregular reimbursements before the night of the DNA report. Mark knew scrutiny was coming. That gave the entire scheme a motive. A normal divorce would have forced both of us into financial disclosure. accounts, loans, cards, transfers, statements, debts, assets, everything. Mark could not afford a normal divorce. He needed a fast one. A private agreement. A frightened wife. A house sold quickly. A large payment to him. Debts divided before I understood where they came from. And, most importantly, language discouraging either side from investigating the finances any further. The DNA report was never designed to survive serious legal scrutiny. It only needed to survive me. For a few days. Maybe a week. Long enough for humiliation and panic to do what evidence could not. Mark had known me for 15 years. He knew I was private. He knew I worked in an environment where rumors could move faster than official information. He knew I hated personal drama reaching my workplace. He knew accusations involving another man would horrify me. He knew my parents' disappointment could cut through me faster than anger. He believed I would sign because fighting would feel more humiliating than surrendering. He understood the fear correctly. He misunderstood me. About 6 weeks into the investigation, Sonia found the evidence that changed something inside me. It was not the biggest financial discovery. It was simpler. A life insurance update from earlier that year. Mark had listed Lucy Bennett as his daughter. No uncertainty. No notation. No question. Then Sonia located a daycare enrollment form. Mark had signed it in the section marked biological father. Again, no hesitation. But the most important item was an email Mark had sent Colin shortly before the family confrontation. It said, "If she thinks this could follow her into work, she'll settle before anybody digs through the accounts." I read that line 3 times. That was when the last part of my marriage died. Not when he accused me. Not when he let his mother insult Lucy. Not when he tried to remove me from my own house. It died when I realized he had spent 15 years learning what embarrassed me, what frightened me, and what I valued, and then converted that knowledge into leverage. The following months were exhausting in boring, relentless ways. That is the part stories usually skip. Mark restricted access to the joint checking account. Claire had to request temporary orders so I could reliably access money for groceries, fuel, and Lucy's expenses. I missed 2 days of work for legal meetings and document reviews. I gave my supervisor explanations that were technically true and emotionally useless. Family legal matter. Property issue. Financial documentation. Lucy developed an ear infection while we were still at the hotel and screamed through most of 3 consecutive nights. Legal bills arrived. Hotel charges piled up. My mother sent messages every few days. Please think about what causes the least damage for everyone. Maybe a quiet agreement would be healthier. You both need to compromise. Every time I read the word everyone, I wondered why it never seemed to include me. One night I nearly quit fighting. I was sitting in Claire's conference room with Henry after reviewing another set of records. I said, maybe I should take a smaller settlement. Henry watched me. I can rebuild savings, I continued. I can find another house eventually. I can work more. I just don't know how many mornings I can wake up with this sitting on my chest. He folded his hands. Mark is not offering you peace. I looked at him. He is offering you silence. And he expects you to purchase it with your own property. That sentence stayed with me. I did not sign. A few days later, Sonia called. I had asked her whether Mark's employer knew anything about the questionable transfers yet. Not the full scope, she said, but he knows their auditors are coming in Monday. Mark was running out of time. Claire filed for temporary orders. There was nothing cinematic about them. No judge pounding a gavel. No dramatic hallway confrontation. Just practical legal protection. No major asset transfers. Financial records preserved. Access to necessary household funds restored. A defined parenting schedule. Restrictions preventing anyone from moving or encumbering significant property while the case was pending. Mark reacted as though I had launched an invasion. He told relatives I had brought military lawyers after him. That almost made me laugh. Henry was a 71-year-old estate attorney who wore reading glasses on a chain and apologized to receptionists when they handed him too many paper clips. But Mark needed a version of events where he had been attacked. So he created one. He told it repeatedly. I never got a dramatic recorded confession. Real life rarely gives you one. Instead, Mark became careless. Pressure made him text things he probably would never have written when calm. One message said, "You can end this immediately if you sign the agreement I gave you." Another said, "Your parents believed the report. Don't assume a court is going to be any more sympathetic." Then Colin started asking questions. He had helped Mark gather everyone at our house that first night. At first, he had believed his brother. But once he understood that the laboratory denied issuing the report, Colin sent Mark a message. "You told me the test was real and you only needed everybody there so she'd stop fighting. You never said the paperwork itself was questionable." Diane contacted me soon afterward. For the first time, her certainty was gone. Mark told us the test had been arranged through a doctor. She said, "It wasn't. He said a physician recommended the lab." That wasn't true either. Diane went silent. None of those messages, by themselves, explained everything. Together, they built a picture. And pictures matter when enough pieces point in the same direction. The most painful part had almost nothing to do with the finances. Lucy still loved Mark. Under the temporary parenting arrangement, his visits were supervised. The first time I brought her in, she saw him across the room and immediately stretched both arms forward. Dada! Her entire face lit up. I turned away and pretended to reorganize the diaper bag. I hated what Mark had done. But Lucy was 13 months old. She did not understand debt. She did not understand fabricated documents. She did not understand that her father had used a lie about her biology to frighten her mother. She simply knew him as the man whose footsteps she recognized. There were evenings when that broke me more thoroughly than anything Claire or Sonia could have shown me. I wondered whether exposing Mark would somehow hurt Lucy more than protecting her from him. Claire answered that question one afternoon. Protecting your daughter does not require protecting Mark from the consequences of using her. I needed to hear it more than once. There was one unexpectedly funny moment in the middle of those months. Aaron sent me a screenshot from Facebook Marketplace. Mark was selling the Rolex I had bought him for his 45th birthday. He used to wear that ridiculous watch while mowing the lawn. The listing said, "Excellent condition, barely worn." Someone asked whether the original box was included. Mark replied, "My estranged wife kept it when she left. I had never touched the box." I sat on the edge of the hotel bed laughing so hard I had to cover my mouth to keep from waking Lucy. It was the first real laugh I had managed in weeks. Not because the situation was funny. Because Mark had apparently reached a point where even the location of his watch box had become my responsibility. Then I looked toward my laptop. Lucy's reflection appeared in the dark screen. The laughter disappeared. Around the same time, Mark's employer placed him on administrative leave. Their internal review had uncovered questionable reimbursements similar to what Sonia had already flagged. Mark called me that evening. "This happened because of you." I almost did not answer. "What happened because of me?" "They started digging because your attorneys started asking questions." "No. You think this is funny?" "I think transactions made them suspicious." "You created the situation." "I requested records." "You knew exactly what that would do." I looked across the hotel room at Lucy stacking plastic cups on the carpet. "Your financial records created your problem, Mark. I only asked to see them." He hung up. Not long afterward, he offered a revised settlement. It looked gentler. It was not. The language had changed. The strategy had not. He still wanted the house sold. He still wanted a lump sum payment. He still wanted certain debts shared. He still wanted both parties to waive deeper financial examination. Mark clearly believed time and legal expenses had exhausted me enough to accept what humiliation had failed to force me to accept. Claire and I decided not to reveal every piece of evidence before mediation. That decision made me nervous. If we were overestimating the strength of the documents, we could be committing ourselves to months of litigation. But I had started to understand Mark's psychology too. He needed to believe he controlled the room. So we let him. On the morning of mediation, I barely ate. The conference room had beige walls, a rectangular table, 6 padded chairs, and a pitcher of water that nobody touched. There was nothing dramatic about it. Just me, Claire, Mark, his attorney, and the mediator. Henry, Sonia, and Aaron were reachable if needed, but Claire wanted the presentation simple. Mark arrived looking rested. That annoyed me more than it should have. He placed a revised agreement on the table. Then he set a silver pen across the first page. "Sign it, Rachel." I looked at the pen. He continued. "We tell everyone the marriage broke down. We both made mistakes. We move on." I opened my bag. "I haven't agreed that we both made mistakes." Mark sighed. "Are we doing this again?" I removed a slim folder. "Before I sign anything, I think your lawyer should read what the laboratory said about your DNA report." His attorney looked up. Claire took over. No raised voice. No dramatic accusation. Just paper. First came written confirmation from the laboratory. They had never issued the report Mark used. They had no matching case. No matching result. No record of the supposed test. Then Claire provided documentation of the attempted credit line against my inherited house. Then the undisclosed liabilities. Then account statements. Then messages showing that the DNA accusation had been connected directly to pressure for a quick settlement. Then information from Mark's employer regarding its ongoing internal review. Mark's face changed slowly. At first, annoyance. Then calculation. Then anger. Finally something closer to fear. He pointed at the laboratory letter. Somebody could have changed the report. Nobody answered immediately. He looked at his lawyer. "That's possible." His attorney continued reading. Mark leaned forward. "You know documents get altered." His lawyer put one hand flat on the table. "Mark, I need a private conversation with you." The two men left. No shouting. No one threatened to quit. Nothing like television. They returned several minutes later. Mark's attorney sat down. He organized the papers into a neat stack. Then he said mediation could not proceed meaningfully until Mark provided complete financial disclosure and a credible explanation for the disputed laboratory document. That was all. And somehow it was more devastating than any theatrical confrontation could have been. I did not walk out with everything I wanted. That is important. The unfair settlement was withdrawn. The temporary asset protections remained. A full financial examination was scheduled. Mark's credibility had taken a serious hit. But the divorce was not magically over. There were still months ahead. There was also one issue neither side could leave unresolved. A new DNA test was ordered. This time the process was documented. Identity verified. Samples collected properly. Accredited testing. Chain of custody. No home kit. No mysterious printed page. The result came back exactly as I knew it would. Mark was Lucy's biological father. I sat in my car after receiving the confirmation and cried with both hands on the steering wheel. It was not relief. Not really. It was anger. I had spent 4 years trying to become Lucy's mother. I had carried her. Delivered her. Fed her at 3 in the morning. Watched her first smile. Held her through fevers. And still, after everything, the truth about my daughter had required another piece of paper before people were willing to believe me. Several weeks later, Diane requested a family meeting. She wanted the people who had been present during the original confrontation to hear what had actually happened. I almost refused. The idea of sitting in that living room again made my stomach tighten. But my parents had been there. Colin had been there. Diane and her husband, Robert, had been there. Something in me wanted the lie closed in the room where it had been opened. So I went. This time there was no cheesecake in my hands. No diaper bag hanging from one shoulder. No one told me where to sit. I placed a small folder on the coffee table myself. Then I explained the facts. The first DNA report did not come from the laboratory named on the page. No one interrupted. The properly administered test confirmed Mark as Lucy's biological father. Diane closed her eyes briefly. I continued. Mark also tried to obtain credit using a house that belonged solely to me. He had liabilities he did not disclose, and messages recovered during the financial review show he expected the paternity accusation to pressure me into signing before anyone examined the accounts. Colin looked miserable. I helped him get everybody here that night. I looked at him. I know. I thought the report was real. You still helped turn it into an ambush. He nodded. I did. Diane turned toward Mark. Her voice was different from the one she had used with me months earlier. You stood there while I called that little girl someone else's child. Mark shifted in his chair. You don't understand what things were like. Robert stared at him. Then explain it. Mark looked around the room. I needed Rachel to cooperate. She controls every decision, every account, every property issue. I almost laughed. You didn't need cooperation. His eyes moved toward me. You needed me humiliated enough that I wouldn't ask questions. That's not what happened. That is exactly what happened. Mark stood. I was trying to prevent us from losing everything. You were trying to prevent me from finding out why we were losing it. He shook his head. You always think you know better. And you thought a fake DNA result would make me easier to manage. His face reddened. Then he said the sentence that destroyed whatever explanation he still thought he had. The test was never supposed to be used in court. Nobody moved. Mark realized too late what he had said. He tried to fix it. That's not what I mean. Robert slowly stood. Mark looked at his father. Dad. Robert buttoned his coat. You used your own daughter as leverage. That's not fair. I don't know where you learned to do something like that. Mark said nothing. It wasn't from me. Robert walked out. Diane did not follow him. My father spoke next. Thomas had barely said a word during most of the meeting. Now he looked directly at me. I waited for evidence before I defended my own daughter. I held his eyes. Yes. I was wrong. I believed him. But forgiveness is not the same thing as erasing the event. I know you're sorry. He nodded. I am. I'm still not ready to act like that night didn't change something. His eyes watered slightly. I understand. And for once, neither of us tried to make the moment easier than it was. Diane reached toward a framed family photograph on the side table. It showed Mark in the middle, smiling, with the rest of us around him. She lifted it. Then she placed it face down. Months earlier, I might have imagined enjoying that moment. I did not. I picked Lucy up. I said goodbye to my parents. Then I walked outside. The driveway looked ordinary. Same concrete. Same mailbox. Same patch of grass Colin's truck had damaged during the first confrontation. But I felt different standing there. The first time I had walked out of that house, I had been terrified that everyone inside might believe Mark instead of me. This time, I realized I no longer needed anyone inside that house to certify my truth. 10 months changes a life in strange ways. It is long enough to create new routines. Short enough that certain sounds still reach backward. For months, whenever my phone buzzed on a Friday evening, my stomach tightened before I even looked at the screen. Mark's consequences did not arrive in one grand collapse. They came gradually. Procedurally. One document at a time. After the construction company finished its internal review, he lost his job. There was also a professional disciplinary process connected to his work credentials. The last information I received through the case was that it remained unresolved. The attempted credit line against my house produced its own civil consequences. The financial settlement assigned debts according to who had actually created and controlled them rather than making me absorb obligations I had never authorized. Mark eventually entered a structured treatment program for gambling. I knew about it only because his participation affected the conditions surrounding parenting time with Lucy. There were no dramatic newspaper headlines. No cinematic ending. Just a man slowly losing pieces of the life he had tried to preserve through deception. I kept my grandmother's house at first. Legally, I could. The property remained mine. Mark moved out under the settlement. For several months I told myself Lucy and I would stay there. The house had not betrayed me. The walls had not accused me. The roof had not falsified a DNA report. But memory is not reasonable. Every time I entered the living room, I saw the manila folder lined up with the coffee table. I saw the tissue box. I saw that untouched cheesecake. I saw my father looking at the floor. I started avoiding the room. Then avoiding the entire downstairs after Lucy went to sleep. One evening I realized I was paying utilities, insurance, taxes, and maintenance on a place I no longer felt comfortable sitting in. Ownership and safety were not the same thing. So I sold it. Some relatives assumed that meant Mark had gotten what he wanted. They were wrong. He received no control over the decision. There was no forced sale to rescue him from debt. No settlement payment created from fear. I sold it after everything was resolved because I chose to. That difference mattered to me. I bought a smaller brick house in Georgetown. It has a narrow front porch, a fenced backyard, a maple tree close enough to the kitchen window that in October the leaves collect against the glass whenever the wind blows hard. The first autumn there, I thought the mess would bother me. It did not. Lucy loved the leaves. She would press both hands against the window and yell every time another one fell. There is enough room for her to grow. Enough room for me to breathe. And no hallway contains a memory she should have to inherit. Mark completed 6 months in treatment before supervised visits resumed under the updated parenting plan. I do not rush forgiveness. I told him that directly. Our conversations became narrow and functional. Pickup times. Medical appointments. Daycare. Clothes. Medication. Food. Nap schedules. Anything Lucy needed. Nothing about us. During one supervised visit, Mark asked if we could speak privately for a minute. We stood near the doorway where I could still see Lucy playing on the floor. He looked older. Not dramatically. Just tired. I kept telling myself I was trying to stop our family from losing everything. I studied him. You were trying to stop yourself from being exposed. He looked down. I panicked. You planned. He flinched. There was a difference, and we both knew it. After a moment, he said, "Do you think you'll ever forgive me?" I thought carefully before answering. That isn't the job in front of us right now. He looked at me. The job is for you to become somebody Lucy can safely trust. He nodded. That was the end of the conversation. My relationship with my parents took longer to repair. My mother wanted things fixed quickly. She disliked emotional distance. She kept inviting me to Sunday dinners and sending photographs from family gatherings as if enough normal behavior could override one terrible night. I went occasionally. I stayed polite. But I stopped pretending closeness could be restored on command. My father handled it differently. Thomas started coming to my house on Saturdays. At first, he found practical reasons. A loose cabinet hinge. A fence latch. A gutter. Then he decided Lucy needed a playhouse in the backyard. He spent several weekends building it. Nothing fancy. A small wooden platform. 2 windows. A little porch. A roof painted white. Lucy was far too young to appreciate the craftsmanship, but Dad treated every board like he was building a permanent structure. I brought him iced tea. We talked about weather. Work. The price of lumber. Anything except that Friday night. Then one Saturday afternoon, he set his hammer down. He was sitting on the unfinished porch of the playhouse. I was standing a few feet away. He looked at me and said, "I still think about that night." "So do I. I keep wishing I had stood up when they told you to leave." I swallowed. "So do I." That was all. No speech. No dramatic apology. No hug that magically restored 15 broken things at once. But something changed afterward. A little. Then a little more. That is what healing has looked like for me. Not one big moment. 100 small ones that almost nobody else would notice. Last Saturday, I sat on the front porch of my new house with a glass of iced tea. Lucy was in the yard chasing bubbles. She had learned to yell before they even popped, as though sheer excitement might keep them floating longer. One drifted toward the porch. It landed against my palm and disappeared. I watched the tiny wet circle fade from my skin. For a long time, I had imagined justice would feel like revenge. I thought maybe I would feel satisfied when Mark lost his job. Or when his financial problems became his responsibility instead of mine. Or when his own family realized what he had done. I thought I wanted to watch him lose everything. But when those consequences finally arrived, they did not make me feel triumphant. Justice was quieter than that. Justice was being able to buy groceries without wondering whether Mark had frozen an account. It was sleeping in a house where nobody had once placed a fabricated report beside a box of tissues. It was keeping Lucy safe without teaching her that loving her father required ignoring what he had done. It was refusing to sign an unfair agreement simply because I was tired. It was allowing evidence to take time. It was accepting that some relationships with my own family would need rebuilding rather than pretending they had never cracked. And it was watching consequences land where they belonged instead of carrying them for someone else. At 43, I learned something I wish I had understood earlier. A lie does not become powerful simply because it sounds convincing. It becomes powerful when it makes you too ashamed to question it. Too frightened to investigate it. Too tired to fight it. Mark expected humiliation to make me disappear. In one sense, I did leave that night. I carried my daughter out of the house. I slept in a hotel. I cried. I doubted people I had trusted for most of my life. I spent money I had never planned to spend and endured months I would never choose to repeat. But leaving was not surrender. I never signed away my house because someone frightened me. I never accepted debt that was not mine. I never allowed a fake document to redefine my daughter. And I never surrendered my own name just because the people sitting in my living room were temporarily willing to believe someone else's version of me. If someone you trusted has ever tried to rewrite your story, maybe you already understand what I learned. Sometimes holding your ground does not look brave while you are doing it. Sometimes it looks like crying in a hotel room. Calling an attorney. Saving screenshots. Reading bank statements. Showing up to meetings when you barely slept. Saying no one more time after you are exhausted from saying it. But exhaustion is not defeat. Sometimes it is simply what standing your ground feels like before the truth finally catches up.